about like 2 weeks ago, I went to go do a photo shoot because I want new headshots. And I just got them yesterday. And I was like, do my characters have headshots? I'm like, do they even think of headshots? I'm like, is that even a thing for them? I've never even thought of having my characters have a headshot. Do they think like, yeah, I need new headshots for my job?
No, my characters don't.
Right?
Trying to think of a character who would want one. A lot of my characters are in a time where they don't have cameras, so they would have to get like portraits painted.
Interesting. Have you ever had one of your characters paint a portrait of themselves?
No, I have not. Though I do have a character who's a sculptor. In my sci-fi side, I have a character who does look at like hologram pictures and things like that of her and her friends and things. So does that count?
Sure. Yeah, I just thought it was a very interesting thought to think about. Because, I mean, I did write my characters in the modern time. So I'm like, I've never actually thought about my characters.
And if they have a job that needs it, like it could be a interesting scene to have in.
Do they have LinkedIn? Imagine you as the author literally go and make a LinkedIn account for your character. That would be so funny. See if they would actually be able to land a job.
I actually had some friends who were like, back when it was Twitter, I want to make a Twitter account for all of your characters. Because when it becomes popular, then I have the rights to the @name of that character, not somebody else.
Ooh, that's interesting.
Yeah. I'm like, thank you for your faith in me and the fact that you think I'm going to be a popular writer, but I don't know.
So I woke up this morning with a tickle in my throat and I was like, hey, no. So I made like my little concoction that I have. So it's like red onion that you boil and then take the water and then you put in honey and olive oil.
That's a very interesting tea combination to me. I don't know if I would like oil in my tea.
You know, it really softens your lips.
I can't bet it does. So I'm doing a Bengal tea with cream. So it's a Bengal tea latte.
That sounds yummy.
And it's so spicy. Oh, it smells so good.
Ooh, nice. Let's get into this episode. Welcome to Tea and Tales. We are so glad that you are here with us. I'm Madeleine Einau.
And I'm Sarah Sampson. We especially want to thank Britta Franceschi and PM Vance for joining us and commenting on our social medias. We have a special guest returning to our podcast, the ever lovely Clare Draycott, and we will be talking with her about common item names in our stories. Why? Because you would be surprised how different names can be, even if we think we're all speaking the same language. So let's welcome on our special guest, Clare Draycott. Welcome back to Tea and Tales, Clare. We're so excited that you're back. You are just one of our favorite people ever.
That's really kind of you. Well, thank you for inviting me back. I'm very honoured.
Well, I definitely feel like today's episode is the perfect segue for all of us, since we are all from different countries. So I think it's very applicable because we all have knowledge of this topic that we are going to be discussing.
Especially because when we're talking about words that you use in different countries and the way that people phrase things in different areas, like what's the best way to find out what those words would be than to actually talk to the person from that country? Like, internet research only gets me so far. I might get like the correct word, but do I have the phrasing and do I know the inflection behind it and the circumstances behind it?
That's why I've never been brave enough to write a novel set in a place that I don't know and understand. I really am genuinely impressed with anyone that tries it. There's so much, I should think, research that's needed, especially if you don't have the opportunity to actually go to the place. How many of us have the money to be able to do that all the time? Media, things like TV programs, films, that kind of thing is helpful. Having a friend who lives there and can help you is helpful.
Even though I lived in Spain for 3 years, I still would not feel comfortable writing a main character as a Spaniard, maybe as an American who was living in Spain, because that's how I came to understand it. But you have to step into the culture if your character is in that culture as well.
For someone like me who has traveled. I mean, I lived in America, I lived in the Netherlands. So one of my novels actually did take place in the Netherlands. As Claire said, it was the easiest novel to write because I was in the Netherlands and because I experienced all those things. But I still went to someone and I was like, hi, how do you say this in Dutch?
It's really helpful, isn't it, to have people who you can ask in that way. I was looking over some of the conversations we had when you were writing your England-based book, and it did make me giggle. How do you pick up on the language and the vocabulary and the speech patterns and all that kind of thing of a place? It struck me when I was thinking about this. Every creative writing course I've done, there's been lots and lots of emphasis on writing using your five senses and bringing all of that into the writing. But nobody on any of the courses I've done has once spoken about language and how you can ground your reader in a place or even that character by some of the vocabulary they're using and the kinds of vocabulary they use at specific times. It struck me as really odd that none of them have touched on it at all.
But it's true. I've only really heard people mention this in passing, like an editor be like, just make sure you got the verbiage right for your area or whatever. Or people complaining that you can't have way too much local dialect. You're going to lose your readers or whatever. So there is a kind of balance between how much of the dialect and how much of the words that you use and how much you are taking into account your target market and your readership.
Yes.
And that's really, really hard to say. And I think the trends right now are leaning a lot more to staying as true to the dialect as much as possible right now, which I think is amazing. In the past, it's been, oh, just sprinkle it in. It'll be fine. I'll give them a taste, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But you lose so much of the character if you have to make them fit into what the reader's going to expect, as opposed to showing the respect to the culture and the place that they're actually from or doing, especially in fantasy writing. A lot of times when I'm writing my epic fantasies, I'm not writing about England versus Ireland versus Australia. I'm writing worlds that I've created. And so I have to make my cultures feel real by creating all these differences and keeping them straight in my mind of this person's from here, they need to speak this way, and being aware that my audience wants to know these cultures.
I love that you say that, Sarah, because I have South African author friends who write romance and their target audience is kind of Americans. And so their novels tend to be Americans in America. And they will actually get American editors to edit their novels to make sure that the language is correct and the way of speaking is correct and mannerisms and all those things. Even though I do write novels that do take place overseas, I'm like, I refuse. Like, there's going to be some South African sprinkle in there as well.
So glad you said that and I didn't have to. What is it with this disappearing U's and the S's that turn into Z's?
I think also you need to consider who your target audience is. If you're not too caught up in who reads your novel, and the reader that's reading it isn't too caught up in whether the culture or the description or the placement is correct or not, then by all means you don't need to be so specific about what you're writing. If you're very serious about only having a British target audience or a New Zealand target audience or something like that, then you kind of need to have your language in the correct manner and phrase, because someone's going to pick up that book and be like, we don't say that. Like, where did this come from?
There is also, I want to put the caveat in here that you have the option to have your book translated for different cultures, and that includes different cultures that speak the same language. So maybe you wrote your book for, say, the British audience, but then after you've been published, you want to release in America, you can have separate editions that have little things changed so that they match the culture better and is accepted better into the culture. I see this most often going to different languages. Take the book in English and you take the book in Spanish, you compare them and what they would translate into, you'll find whole passages that are different simply because that particular joke doesn't come off in the other language very well. So they'll change it into something that means a similar thing, but for that culture.
That's really interesting you should say that, because early on when I joined P2P, I went along to a group where we discussed the first 5 pages. The people in the group, we all gelled and we got along really well. So we met outside of P2P online and we swapped pages. I was the only British person in the group. Everybody else in the group was American. And in the course of swapping these pages and then having the discussions online, one of them queried a word that I'd used, which they hadn't understood, which was the word jumper for an item of clothing. Come back to that later. And she said to me, I mean, it was quite touching because she said, when you publish your book, which I thought was, showing great faith in my abilities. So when you publish your book, will you change the vocabulary and the spelling for the American market? In those days, I was a very sort of ignorant debut author. I had no idea how these things worked. And so I was just like, no, I don't think so. And of course, you're absolutely right, Sarah, that it's got nothing to do with me. I would write my book the way I want to write my book. And it will be the publishing house in America that decides that certain things need to be tweaked, and the edits will come back and you'll say, oh, yes, that's fine. But what interests me about all of that is that I've read a few novels recently by American authors. I thoroughly enjoyed them all. Spellings, vocabulary aren't changed. I mean, I don't know how much has been changed, obviously, because I didn't see the original. But there are definitely things in there that don't mean anything necessary to the British audience, and you have to go and Google and look them up. And the spellings definitely haven't added in the U's and haven't changed the Z's back to S's and so on. And it just really interested me because their assumption was that it would be changed. But what you've just said, of course, makes complete sense, that you've got teams of people in publishing houses who will, when your rights are sold to New Zealand, they will say, well, this doesn't really fly. I have to say, when I find things in books by authors from other countries that I don't understand, I quite like that because I can go to Google and look it up and I've learned something new. That's why we read. It's not the only reason we read, but it's a reason we read, is to expand our horizons, expand our vocabulary, expand our experience of humanity. So I don't mind looking things up. There seems to be this idea that you can't use vocabulary that's too challenging because if people don't understand it, it's going to put them off. And I thought, well, why don't they just Google what the word means? I mean, is that unreasonable of me? I don't know.
No, not at all. Yes. So much yes.
I 100% agree with you, because here's the thing. It's the same scenario that I will use for when I went to America. I was an au pair, and then naturally we have au pair meetups where you meet other au pairs and stuff. And then the council was like, here's some South African au pairs for you to connect with. I'm like, why? I could have stayed in South Africa if I wanted to connect with South Africans. I'm like, no, give me other people to connect with. And I kind of feel it's the same way. I'm like, why am I reading this novel from a British author if I don't want to dive into that culture, if I don't want to be embraced by that world? I feel, each country is their own world. Reading something from another author who's not from the same country as you are, you really do get to expand your knowledge of that country, of that culture, of that language. And I think that's why I'm probably very adamant about keeping my words and sayings. A lot of times I will say stuff in Afrikaans, and then because I don't know what the English is for it, I will just translate it into English. And then people are like, what? And I'm like, you're welcome. That's how we do it over here. For example, so we have a saying, I translate it with like, you swat 2 flies with 1 slap. People are like, what? You mean kill 2 birds with 1 stone? And I'm like, yes, but yours sounds boring, so no. But thank you very much.
One of the things that always makes me stop and go, you have to be wrong about this advice you're giving me, is when people say you can't or you don't. Because I think, when though? Like, you can't use complicated vocabulary. That tells me that your target market is somebody that doesn't know those words, and my target market is somebody who does.
Yes.
And you need to leave my words alone. If you're beta reading for somebody, or if you are reviewing something for somebody and you don't understand it, you need to take the context of their novel and what they're trying to do in account. Look it up yourself, make sure they've used it properly, and then move on with your life. Let them use the words that they want to use, especially if it's part of their voice or if it's part of their character's voice. I have characters who use a lot more vaulted language and a lot more formal language than other characters. And I don't want a beta reader to tell me to make their language less formal. I'm sorry, they're a politician. That would be my word of warning to people, is when you hear the don't and the never, you also need to stop and think, but is there a situation when that can be broken and done well?
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I just think telling somebody who's creating you can't do X or you mustn't do Y, it seems sort of illogical to me, because you're immediately putting a barrier on their creativity, which you may find when you've finished the piece of work that some of that advice was right and you have to go back and tinker and adjust and so on. But I think to categorically say you cannot do X or you mustn't do Y, because if you do, you won't get published, is nonsensical, because that, as I say, that is just damning somebody's creativity, and sort of putting a stop in place. And I can't see how that's helpful at all. And I think also there's a certain degree to which, if you're beta reading for somebody, if you loathe that genre or you don't know anything about that genre or you've never read that genre, you're not necessarily the best person to be beta reading anyway. On one occasion I can think of, I was asked to beta read for somebody and I had huge misgivings about it because they were writing something I never read. And I thought, I this isn't my thing. It was science fiction. And I said to the person who was asking me, I said, I know nothing about science fiction. I don't read science fiction. I don't watch science fiction. I don't think I'm going to be a very good person to help you. And I read a few chapters and I found it really hard going. And there were a couple of little things I could say about the writing generally and then the rest of it, I thought, I'm not qualified to make any kind of judgment call as to whether this is good, bad, or indifferent, because I don't know the genre. So I had to write back and say, I've noticed this thing in your writing where your tenses are slipping and switching. And, it would obviously be helpful if you stay in the same tense. Other than that, I don't really think there's much I can do to help you. And I'm really sorry, but I don't want to waste your time, because there was nothing I could do in terms of the content and the tropes and the plot twists, and that I have no idea how it works.
I love how our conversation about culture and language has morphed into this bigger topic, because language is the same as genre. If you don't understand the culture and you don't understand the language, you are not the person to comment on it. The only comments I make about another culture when I'm reading about a culture I don't understand are clarifying questions that I say, as an American, I don't fully understand what this is. Can you put in more context clues? I never ask them to take it out. I never ask them to change the verbiage or language. Just add in a word or two that will help me as an American understand the culture so I can understand going forward. Sometimes people get so comfortable in what they are used to and what is right for them that it's hard to look at something and say, that is right for them and I need to accept that.
Can I circle back to your point about creating your languages, because it's kind of relevant? Because when you were talking about that, I thought to myself, how do you make it clear when you've made up some language? How do you make it the meaning of that clear? Are you able to weave that in to the storyline, or do you have a key that people can refer to?
There's 3 different things that I do. The first one is context clues, so that when you read it, you have an idea of the feeling of the words. And usually that will be something that's more expressing an emotion or something, so that you can intuitively understand the words. The second one I do is I will do a direct translation in thoughts. For example, I will have my main character hearing the phrase from somebody else and translating it in their head as they go, so that you hear it. And then those phrases I will use multiple times, so that every time you see it, you know what it is,
right? But
still have that flavor of the language. Other thing that I do is I'll make a glossary. If there's words that I really can't completely explain, or things that I have explained, I will even put it in the glossary to be like, here's a quick reference in case you forgot what I told you it was 3 chapters ago. So they can go and they can look at it. But the other thing I try to do is I try to use words that have similar roots, so that when you hear one word and then hear the second word that sounds very similar, you can connect them and get an idea of what they are and feel like you're following it along that way.
That's very clever. I like that. Wow. You're being so creative with language, Sarah. That's really impressive.
Thank you.
I 100% agree about the language in novels and not changing it just because you don't understand it. Because, English is not my first language. And so a lot of times I will be reading English books and I'm like, what's this word? It's an opportunity to figure out what that word means. So I have a beta reading group, and it's me, and then I have two British people, and so naturally their novels are in the British dialect, in the British language. And a lot of times I will just literally, in my comments, I'm like, is this a British phrase? Because I have no idea what this means. And then they just continue. And so, for example, the one time she was talking about like a dame school, and I was like, pardon, like what is that? I don't know what that is. And she's like, oh, you don't have that. And so that's also actually an opportunity for the author to kind of learn what people know and what they don't know, because what you might know in your country, someone else might not register in their own country. And then, as Sarah said, that might be an opportunity for you then to either explain it further so that, you know, the broader audience can get what you are saying, or use a different word, or they're like, yeah, no, we're going to stick with this and you're going to have to Google what that means.
In my current work in progress, I'm having to really think about different speech patterns, different types of vocabulary, because my main character is 96 years old. And then I've got other characters who range in age from sort of early 50s down to early 20s. And obviously the early 20-year-old is speaking in a completely different way to the lady who's 96. This podcast is really well timed, actually, because I have been thinking very carefully about language, and particularly vocabulary that people use, and the speech patterns with which they communicate across the different age ranges, which is obviously another factor in this particular subject. It's making me focus on dialogue and choice of vocabulary even more closely than usual. So it's not quite as exotic as making up an entire language, but it's still quite close.
I also like what you mentioned with pronunciation, because, you know, depending on who you write about and where they are, so many different people say words in so many different ways. And then how do you as an author kind of convey that pronunciation of words? Because the way I would pronounce water and the way Sarah would pronounce water are two different things.
That is not how I say water.
That's a different part of the United States altogether.
Yes.
Very southern.
I love the pronunciations, though, because I have a particular group of people who pronunciate words very strange. And I try not to write them very much, because for me to get the inflection across, I have to use a lot of strange marks and wrong spellings, and my spell checkers hate it. But also, I will forget, because I'll just type the way that I want to type, and I go, oh, wait, this is a person from that culture. I have to go back.
How crucial is it to you, Sarah, that the reader does hear these words the way you want them to hear them?
It kind of depends on the culture. Overall, not much at all. But this very specific subculture, the fact that they pronunciate things wrong is part of what sets them as that subculture. Like, I don't really care. Come up with whatever you want.
I think at some point you've got to accept that there are certain things you cannot control. And if you don't accept that as the writer, you're going to drive yourself mad. So having done all of that work to create a new language, you have to be a little bit chill about how people are hearing it in their mind's ear, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't care if you mispronunciate my words or mispronunciate my character names. Go for it. I'll put the glossary in the back if you really want to know, but I get it. It's going to be what it is.
Exactly. But also don't make me change my main character's name because you don't know how to pronounce that. That sounds like a you problem, is what I'm saying.
Are you saying that, Nell, because I still don't like the name for your main character?
No, not at all.
All I'm saying is, in the spirit of this podcast, that, you know, we're talking about setting things in other countries and making sure it's real and true to those countries. Probably, if you're setting a story in York, maybe not give your main character a South African name. I mean, it was just a suggestion, you know.
It will go in the suggestion box and stay there.
Okay, fair enough.
I want to segue into our items and names segment. I have my first item here. I'm going to hold it up so those on camera can see.
Okay.
This is a cloth. It is usually used in taking a shower. It's square. It's small. What would you call this, Claire?
I'd call that a flannel.
Okay. I'd call it a washcloth.
Okay.
Interesting.
What would you call it now?
So we either call it a washcloth or a face cloth.
We use face cloths too. But definitely, yeah, flannel's the first one.
When you say flannel, you know what I think about? I think of those shirts that lumberjack men wear with those stripes. That's what I'm like vibing with when I hear flannel. Okay, cool. The next thing, it looks very plain and simple, but what would you call this?
I would call that pop. Pop
Okay.
or a fizzy drink.
This one's hard for me because I have lived all over the United States. And so depending on where I'm at, here in the place I'm at right now, we would call that a soda. But in other places, I would call it a soda pop or just a pop or a Coke.
Okay. So we call this cool drink.
I mean, it does what it says on the tin,
Literally. Literally.
I love it. That's great. I mean, why not?
Why not?
Okay, so this is my next one. And you guys may not like my answer, but we'll see. So this is an item that is round. You use it on the stove. It's shallow in nature with a handle.
You can just stir fry
what
on
would you
it.
call this?
I would call that a frying pan, but I have a feeling I know what you're going to say.
Samesies. We also call it a frying pan.
A skillet or a saucepan. Yeah, so you make your sauces in it because it's shallow enough that it gets an even cook. So it's a saucepan.
Oh, that's interesting because the deep pans are what we call saucepans in the UK.
Samesies.
Well, there you go.
I knew you were going to call it a skillet. And it's interesting, in the film Chocolat, the husband gets drunk and comes to the chocolaterie and wakes them up and tries to drag her out. And she hits him over the head with a skillet. And then he's passed out on the floor. And she said, don't tell me I don't know how to use a skillet. Every single time I watch the film, I think, that's a frying pan. And you wouldn't, in France, you definitely wouldn't say skillet. I really enjoyed the line. I enjoy the humor. I enjoy the fact that she's, succeeded over him. She's vanquished him. And yet the line, don't tell me I can't use a frying pan, wouldn't be anywhere as good as don't tell me I don't know how to use a skillet. The rhythm of it is way better.
Well, sometimes I'll just call it a pan or a frying pan, or like I use all four of the words now, but I'm weird.
Okay, so our next item is something that you will wear when you go hiking or jogging, or it's a pair of shoes that you put on your feet. What would you call these, Sarah?
Okay. What, can we see the other? Can you turn them around so I can see the soles or the...
Now, those ones in particular are sneakers.
Ah, yeah, okay. They're trainers.
So we call them tackies.
Okay.
That one's hard because it's like they can also be tennis shoes. If you've got the thinner kind, then we would call them tennis shoes. And if you've got, there's the specific running shoes. If it's got a different sole, you would call them a running shoe. So there's like 3 different names depending on the exact form of that.
Yeah, and if they've got the ridge sole and a chunky heel, they're a walking shoe, which is different to a walking boot.
Wow.
Yeah,
I think we would call those trainers. It's
in the UK.
All one thing. We're like, go buy yourself some tackies. Okay.
I want to do this one because it's so much fun. We don't have a picture for it because guess what? Cars are too big. But we're talking about a vehicle. So imagine in your head a car vehicle.
Okay.
You have the front and you have the middle where the doors are, and you have the back. The back part of that car, what do you call it? The one that opens up and you can put things in it.
I call that a boot.
Samesies. We also call it a boot.
It's a trunk.
Do you know the amount of looks
It's
I
a
got
trunk.
when I was in America and I was driving behind someone and they left their boot open? They were stopping at a stop street. And so I literally got out of the car and I was like, hi, your boot is open. And they're like, what? And I'm like pointing to the back and they're like, oh, thanks.
Actually,
But
that
do you know
article... Sorry.
Do you know the history as to why we use trunk and you guys use boot?
I was just about to say that because that article you guys sent through was fascinating, and until I read it today, I did not know the history.
It's quite intriguing because it goes back to old terminology. So when the car was first made, there was no space in the back. And so what the American car makers did was they put a little rack on the back where you could put on a chest or a clothing thing, also called a trunk. And you would put your trunk on the back of the car and you would strap it down. We just got rid of that and put it as part of the car. But in England, it became the boot because go back before the car when you had horse-drawn carriages. They had a storage compartment where the boots of the driver would rest on the boot box.
That's
right. So when it transferred into the car. They just kept the same terminology.
53 years old, and I finally know why those two things are called boot and trunk.
Yeah, and here I'm just sitting in South Africa, and because we were colonized by England, we just call it a boot. Alrighty, next item on the list. So, what would you call this fruit? It is not an orange. It is the smaller version of an orange, and it's one of those that you can peel off with your hand. You know, you don't need a knife to open it up.
Got a big orange nose. In this country, we'd call that a satsuma.
And I thought my word was weird, because we call it anachi. Sometimes, you know, us as South Africans, we just take words and make it English as well. So it just became nachi, but it can also kind of be a clementine.
It depends on where you're at, but it is a clementine or a tangerine or a cutie.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because we have satsumas and we have clementines, and they're slightly different. So from the look of that, it felt like the skin was quite loose around the fruit. So that in this country would be a satsuma. But the ones where it's like a small orange and the skin is close around the flesh, that's a clementine. So, I mean, it's splitting hairs, but, you know, nonetheless, that's where we are.
I'll do this one because it's less common. I think some people would absolutely already know some of these things that were on our list. So I'm going to go with this one.
Okay.
Is also footwear like Nell had, but it is plastic. It is waterproof. It has a long neck that goes up your leg. This one only goes over the shin. It's not the one with the super long, like full leg, but just to the shin. What would you call this, Claire?
I call that a Wellington boot, named after Wellington himself.
Oh, there you go.
So we call those gumboots.
It's really interesting because I've always thought gumboot was an American term. Is that not, Sarah?
Not from where I'm in America, but it might be. When you get down into like the marshlands, they have lots of different names for this kind of boot. And depending on how tall the leg is, depending on all sorts of different things, it has 100 different names for what you're using it for. And farmers have different names, but I would call this one a rain boot or a galosh.
Galosh. Sounds very posh.
Go grab your galoshes.
One last item. Now I have to make this good. Okay, are we ready for this? So what would you call this item? It is a container where you put in your trash. Feels pretty obvious.
Here in the UK, we just call that a bin. So in the house, they're bins, and you can have a kitchen bin, you can have a waste paper bin, and then the large one outside is a dust bin. So,
okay, so we just
a kitchen bin.
Gotcha. So we just call all our stuff a dustbin, which is quite ironic because everything goes in there
Regardless
except
of-
dust.
So if you had a small, I don't know, wicker or wooden bin in your living room to put paper in and tissues, and would you still call that a dustbin?
Yes.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
I had a very difficult time doing this challenge because I've lived in America, because I've lived in the Netherlands, because I am South African. When I was looking up these things, I'm like, what do I call it? I don't even know anymore. Do I call this a trash can? Do I call this a dustbin? I don't know. I honestly don't know what I call things because I would say it in Afrikaans. And so a lot of times I wouldn't even say what it is in English. And so like a dustbin would be an asblik. So whether it's big, small, whatever, go throw it in the asblik type of vibes. Now that's kind of what makes it a bit hard when you are bilingual, is because my home language is Afrikaans. I speak to everyone around me in Afrikaans. And so I wouldn't necessarily go be like, yeah, throw that in the dustbin.
So here in America, it's usually trash can or just trash. We'll say, go throw it in the trash. Or if you're in a little bit higher society, I guess, maybe this is why people think that I'm from England. I don't know. But wastebasket.
Yeah.
It's the wastebasket.
The wastebasket. Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it, that we're all speaking English, and yet actually there's, for individual items, quite a huge variety in the vocabulary. We could spend hours researching how all of that came about, but I'm not sure any of us wants to. It is interesting when you compare, the three of us alongside, just how different some things are and how similar others are as well. And I think sometimes the similarities are more interesting in a way than the differences, because you can think what has happened over time that means that we all have used the same word, and what has happened over time that means that it's diverged and we found different words. But as I say, there's probably a whole other podcast by people who know rather more about the history and the social linguistic connections than we do.
And some people may not focus so much on all of those differences in their actual writing, because it can get a little tedious to try and make sure every single thing is right. But if you do have a character or a culture that you want to cling on to, that one thing or that thing that people would recognize as, yes, that's that culture, that's different, then it can add so much flavor to your novel and to your characters. You can really develop a character out by whether they say wastebasket or trash.
Yes.
It really gives a different feeling to you.
Yeah, and it can give the reader a sort of almost instant sense of where that person is in the world. It's almost like a shorthand, isn't it? When it's that clear and so widely known about. Again, it's for picking the vocabulary that the largest group of people are likely to know. It was funny when Nell was writing her book, it's set in York. I do remember getting a message from you saying, "What do you call ketchup?" question mark. And so I text back, "Ketchup." And then you went, "And what do you call a hoodie?" Text back, "A hoodie." For the first time in quite a few of these exchanges, the vocab is exactly the same.
Yeah, well, the funny thing is I asked you the American names because if I asked you, what do you call tomato sauce in British, you'd be like, what's that?
My favourite one from you, Nell, was we'd been talking about different items of clothing, and you then messaged me and you said, "And what do you call the triangular wire thing that you hang your clothes on?" I messaged back, "Clothes hanger." These things are so logical, aren't they?
I want to influence you.
Like, we don't say clothes, we just say a hanger.
I was like, because if I tell you what it is, then you're going to be like, yeah, no, that's what we call it. Just like a description, and then you can tell me what it is.
It was great. And some of your descriptions really made me smile. I was just thought, oh, it's so sweet.
Well, thank you so much, Claire, for being on this episode with us, coming back again to be on this episode with us, because I think we learned so much about other people's culture, and I hope that the person listening to this show also learns a lot and learns the importance of language and how you use it in your writing.
It's been really good fun. I think people will be able to tell that from the amount of giggling that's been going on. It's been really good fun, and as I said at the beginning, it's just a privilege to be invited back. So lovely to see you both. Thank you very much for inviting me.
We love you, Claire, so much, and I'm glad that we're able to share your wisdom with our audience. But we like to keep things short here on Tea and Tales. Get your fingers back on the keyboard and your pens back on paper.
And if you like what we are doing here and you love the awesome guests we have on, then go follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Threads at Tea and Tales Podcast, and on Twitter/X and TikTok at Podcast Tea Tales. And go to that purple icon on your device and go give us 5 stars and share the language that you use in your novels. So help us go up, up, up. It's our moment.
Happy writing!
Bye!